Y'all want to hear about this time where me and my friends went to Miami and we went to this nightclub and there was a spirit in that nightclub and the spirit actually helped me save my friend from possibly being sexually assaulted in the bathroom? Come on. Okay, so me and my friends, we get to Miami. Fast forward, we find this really, really small club. This was the smallest club I ever been to. We went there for my friend Naya's birthday, and we used, us and the girl we used to be friends with, right? And so when we find this club, we get there. It's in a predominantly Latino and Hispanic area. So we're standing in line, and I get this feeling that somebody is staring at me. And I look over, and there's this man walking, like he's just walking towards us. And while he's walking towards us, it's like he was staring me down. All right. When I say staring me down, I mean, I was like, you cool? I ain't trying to start no beef in Miami. You feel me? So fast forward, the man that was staring me down ends up like pretty much bypassing the line and walks right past the security guard. Just walks right in the club. And so I didn't pay it any mind. We finally get let in. And when we get let in, instantly, there's some men buying us drinks. Get some drinks and whatever. But of course, because I come from the kind of family I come from, I don't trust nobody, and I'm from Detroit, so I really don't trust that. So I go over to the bar, and I'm watching them pour our drinks. So get our drinks, go back to this little sitting area, and we sit down. But my friend, she is torn up. When I say, you would think that she had about 3 or 4 or 5 of them things, like she's messed up real bad. And so I'm keeping an eye on her. Mind you, I have to be the sober friend. I'm older than them by 2-3 years. And then I turn around and I was talking to these girls. It was a group of girls from LA that we were kicking it with. And so we're talking to them and ended up turning around and my friend was gone. And I was like I started panicking looking for her. Now, the man that was staring me down, that walked that bypassed the security guard and stuff like that, I see him and I can hear his voice, but I don't see his lips moving. It's so loud in there. It's a miracle I could even hear it, but I hear him. And he said, go to the bathroom. I see my friend, this dude, and she looked like she just having a hard time. And he pretty much holding her up, pretty much. Y'all, I got real active because who did you think you was playing with like this? So I rush over there and I grab my friend. And when I grab my friend, the dude, he get real mad. She said she wanted me to show her. If you don't back the fuck, don't play with me. Do not play with me. So now I'm not feeling safe. You know what I'm saying? Now I'm trying to leave. And so I tell my friend there, she torn up too. I go back over to her. The girls from LA had her. They was making sure she was okay. And so I go back over there and tell her okay, I'm ready to go now. And so, my friend, the other friend that we're not friends with no more, she's still trying to dance and she moving about. And so I'm standing right there with her. I'm pretty much her security guard right about now. And so I'm standing there with her. She dancing, all crazy and whatnot. And so the dude that was trying to take her to the bathroom ended up coming over to me with another dude. They're pretty big dudes. You know what I'm saying? And so there's this guy, he had this accent, like a Jamaican accent. He's over at the bar and the spirit pretty much led me to go and stand next to this man. So I took my friend to go stand next to him. He's not a large guy like these other dudes, okay? He's a, pretty nice sized guy, but he's not big like them. But I go and stand next to them. When I tell you that it took one look for that man to get them 2 men. And they got on. They got on. And he it's almost like he was all right, nah. Just gave him this look. But after that, I felt okay. In my spirit, I felt like it was settled. You know what I'm saying? But then after we ended up leaving from there, I made my friend come on. The guy, he said, y'all need some water. So he get us some water. I give it to my friend. She sobers up. My other friend sobers up. So I'm ready now, to get them out of there. And I'm okay, cool. We ended up leaving out of the club. Now, I told y'all this is a predominantly Latino and Hispanic community that the club was in. And so my friends, they're from really small, predominantly white towns. Okay. yes, they're black, by the way. So they're very naive. So I'm like looking at them. We like wanting to ride the scooters. I see graffiti. The moment I see graffiti, I said, all right, come on. Let's go now. So the spirit is still like staying with me. He not letting up. He's staying with me literally wherever we go. We roll the scooters down. He's right there. You know, he's on it. And so out of nowhere, this Latino man, he pulls up in the car with like maybe 4 other people. It's a woman driving. And he said, hey, what are y'all doing over here? Mind you, I was ready to go anyway, but I got to look out for these 2 dum-dums. So I'm like, I can't leave my friends. You know what I'm saying? So he said, what are y'all doing over here? And he was just like, it's not safe. It's not safe, mommy. It's not safe. You cannot be over here. So I said, that's all I needed to hear. I said, let's go. Let's go. I just, after that, the spirit pretty much, I guess he felt confident enough to go. Because once we got in that Uber, that man drove off. Like he had already driven off, but it's almost like he circled around. We got in our Uber and we get back to our hotel. But when I say that spirit was not letting up, he said, nah, not today. It's not going to happen tonight.
One of my followers, Joshua, sent a story in to me and it made me cry. Hang tight for the twist ending. He shares a story about his life and he starts it where he met this girl. He said he was so nervous trying to work up the courage to ask her out. His voice was shaky and his heart was pounding, but when he finally did, she said yes. He says they start dating and then days turn into weeks, turn into months, turn into years, and he's just living his life happily with her. They were together about 3 years when they decided to move in together, and he said he got a really good job in sales. They build routines together, share groceries, make inside jokes, have fights, and make up. And then the big day comes where he proposes to her along the Pacific Northwest coastline. He remembers the cool air and the sound of the ocean churning. And then fast forward and they get married. He said it was a small and simple wedding. And then they had children. They had 2 daughters, 1 year apart. He says he cherished every moment of their childhood, the days that turned into years. One of his fondest memories was watching his wife at the park holding his oldest daughter's hand as they walked by the playground. She was wearing a simple black dress that moved softly in the breeze, and his heart just swells looking at her. His daughter had a little red sun hat that barely stayed on her head, and they had just gotten back from a family brunch. He's holding his youngest daughter on his hip, and she's sleepy and clingy, and she smells like syrup from the pancakes at brunch. Her hands are still sticky, and he's just enjoying every little moment, thinking back to all of the really happy times and some hard times too. He reminisces about holding them when they were sick and sitting at softball practices because his youngest daughter loves it. He talks about comforting them when their hearts were broken and eating cheap ice cream and watching rom-coms with them. He loved celebrating schoolwork, small victories, and late night talks. And now it's 18 years later and his youngest daughter is about to graduate high school. He was so upset because his new boss was on this power trip and he was making everybody stay late and he did not want to miss this graduation. In his frustration, he thought maybe he should just up and leave this company even though he's been there since he's 25. But all he wanted to do was get to the ceremony. He said there was a really bad thunderstorm and he could barely see to drive. The rain was pouring down, but he pushed through it because he was just determined to make it on time. The rain picked up even more, and then he sees 2 big, bright headlights coming straight towards him. And then he wakes up. He's in a tiny, musty room with a bunk bed overhead. At first, he doesn't recognize anything. And then realization hit, and he thought to himself, I'm back. He says there was no sense of like, oh, that was just a dream. He said it felt like life was ripped out of him. He's 23 years old. He's in a crappy shack that his ex-wife's parents forced them into, under their generosity, which always came with threats. He was in an abusive relationship with no job prospects and no freedom. He said he's sterile with no kids. They are not an option. He said, the kids I just raised for 18 years never existed. The roommate in the bunk above him stirs and his heart sinks. He says, it wasn't real. It wasn't my family. None of that happened. He said, but it felt like it did. He mourns them like real people, real daughters, a real marriage, a life he lived. He says, for weeks he grieved, and then life had to move on. He says, but even now, 10 years later, he still thinks about them, his wife and children, who only existed in a dream. Things are fading, and he doesn't remember their faces anymore, but he remembers the love. I was going to try not to cry, but anyway, that one gets me. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. I'm sure he'll be in there reading them. I have so many thoughts on this, but I don't want to keep crying, so let me know what you think, and follow for more creepy story time.
Let me tell you guys a story time of this friend of mine who gave me a clay doll and told me that because I can't get into any relationship, this will be my boyfriend. And I took it lightly and I took the thing. So how I met this girl, I met her at a McDonald's and she was like, hey, you're so pretty. I was like, thank you, you're pretty too. And she's like, really? Thank you so much. Like, can we be friends? I like you, you're so nice. And I was like, sure, why not? So one thing you should know about this girl is that she comes from a very wealthy family. So I like that about her as well, because every single time we'd go visit her, her mom would give us money to go shopping, or she'd take us out to like restaurants, like nice restaurants. Sometimes she'd take us to McDonald's, things that I used to see on a sometimes basis during the month. Does that make sense? So one day we're sitting watching TV or whatever, and I noticed a clay doll next to the TV, right? And I'm like, Eva, now that clay doll is actually really nice. That's a nice decoration, right? She tells me that they went to Nigeria to get this particular doll, and they went into the indigenous like villages or whatever, because it was a really nice clay doll. It had necklaces or whatever. Little did I know that was a voodoo doll. She gives me the doll. She's like, it's okay, you can have it, you can go decorate. And I was like, yeah, no, this is nice. I lie to people and say that my dad went to Nigeria to go buy this. And she laughs. She's like, also, this is apparently supposed to give you luck. Maybe it'll give you luck in your relationships, because hey, your relationship status is stressing me out. And she's like, even your talking stages and stuff. I'm like, really? Thanks, girl. I take the thing, Even her mom, she told her mom like, hey mama, I gave my friend the doll. The mom is like, oh, okay, no problem. Chilled, I put it in my bag, I take it home with me. So I take the doll when I get home, right? And I put it on my table as a decoration, but like, I put it next to my bed. There's a table next to my bed, ne? So I put this next to my table. My table is obviously next to my bed, like I explained, but I put the thing at the edge of the table, and my bed is like right here. I sleep, guys. I go to bed and I start having dreams where somebody is trying to sleep with me. This time, this person so basically in that dream, I wake up, right? And I want to go to the bathroom. And then this person, I switch on the lights, and then this person comes in my room, switches off the lights and pushes me back. Before I could even see the person, this person pushes me back and puts me on the bed and starts caressing me. I don't know how I allowed this in the dream, but I'm allowing this person to caress me. As soon as they try to take off my clothes is when I push them. And when I push them away, I open my eyes. And never did I think it could be this thing. I let it go. The following day, same thing happens. And I'm thinking, mind you, I'm not praying about this. I'm just thinking, I don't know. I'm not praying about this. I think after about a week of me having the same dream over and over, and I keep pushing this man that I don't know off me, my friend texts me, right? All of a sudden, she doesn't initiate for us to come see each other. I didn't notice that in the beginning, but I do now. She's like, hey, Chomi, how are you? I'm like, I'm good. How are you? She's like, I'm good. I'm thinking she's going to want us to hang out. I ask her, can we hang out this weekend? She's like, no, she's not going to be available or whatever. And she's like, how's the doll treating you? I'm like, I don't know. It's cute. It's a nice artifact. She's like, where did you put it? I tell her I put it on my table, for decoration. She's like, oh, okay, cool. And I'm like, yeah. I'm thinking she's going to speak about something else. She's like, have you been having any weird dreams or whatever? Maybe you seeing money? Because apparently the clay doll was supposed to be bring me luck. I was like, oh no, nothing. So after she asked me about the clay doll, she ended the conversation right there. I was like, I chilled. Nighttime comes, I sleep. This time, guys, in the dream, I started fighting this particular person. And as I'm fighting this person, remember, I wake up. Unfortunately for me, it was 1 a.m. I was scared as hell. And I just remember praying and being like, Lord, whatever this thing is, please give me the strength and courage to fight it. Why did I say that? Because I knew that I was going to go back to sleep and this thing is going to come back. When I tell you, after I prayed, 5 minutes later, I passed out. As I'm passing out, guys, this time we are in the light. I don't see this person's face. I start fighting this person. So as I start fighting this person, eventually I'm down. My back is on the bed or whatever. And as I'm push this person away. I look up and guess who it is? It's my friend's dad. I said, what? Mind you, all along, this person had been coming in my dreams wearing the same outfit. So I see this person is wearing a white cloth or whatever. But this time, I seen this person. It was my friend's dad, the rich friend. The rich friend. The dad was wearing this purple. The dad was wearing this other purple shirt and this other black pants. And I was like, man, it really is him because I know that outfit. I start beating this man, and as soon as I realize, this man, like, I start beating this man, I start trying to fight him, and obviously he's overpowering. And as soon as I realize that, no man, that clay doll, its eyes were red and they were like flashing, whatever, my back is on the bed, I roll over in the dream. Remember, I take that thing and I throw it on the floor. I smash it on the floor, and next thing, this person suddenly becomes weak and is like, no, why would you do that? Why would you do that? When I tell you, the house, my room started shaking, the walls started falling and stuff like that. And I'm thinking, hey, but what's going on? And he's like, why would you do that? Now all of a sudden he's scraping, and I'm just looking at him quiet, scared. I woke up that morning with a very bad headache, and I was like, dang, like, that was crazy. When I tell you, I woke up in the morning and I held my phone. Obviously, I prayed a little bit in my heart and I was like, thank you, God, for protecting me, whatever. Mind you, when I wake up, I touched my phone. As I'm looking on my phone, I look at my friend's status, my alleged friend's status, and she's posting of how she's sad or whatever. And next thing, her status, she shows her house. It got demolished. How? I don't know. From top to bottom, it fell. And then I put my phone, as soon as I put my phone down, I realized that clay doll has disappeared. And I'm just like, dang, that is kind of weird. So I text my friend. Obviously, I comment on her status like, damn, what happened? She's like, she doesn't know. There was a minor earthquake and their house fell. Other houses didn't fall, so she doesn't understand what's going on. And I'm like, okay, babe. I'm sorry about that. Like, do you need me to come? She's like, no, it's okay. Same day, baby girl was on a flight with her family members to Nigeria again. She's like, catching flights, not feelings. People are gonna fix the house. You know how people that are rich, obviously she's fixing that. Yeah, you guys may have done little 1-2-1-2, but they're fixing their house. This is not a permanent thing. It's temporary. They're going back to Nigeria for vacation. I post this girl on my story or whatever with her heart on Instagram. This other person sends me a message request on some, hey, get away from that girl, right? And I respond like, why? She's like, this girl, like, her and her family practice witchcraft. Her dad is a ritualist and she's helping her dad because obviously when the dad dies, she's going to take over. I was like, how do you know all of this? She's like, I used to be this girl's friend. We met at the mall. The very same way that she approached me, she approached that girl. And she was like, my dear, this girl gave me a necklace. And when I tell you that necklace, I started sleeping with a thing only to find out that it was her dad. And she says that this thing actually slept with her. And she says when this person was sleeping with her, she was losing her virtues. And then one day, obviously, her mom took her somewhere and they told her to stay away from that girl because that girl is evil as her parents. So you should stay away from her and take that necklace that she gave you and throw it away. And I'm like, girl, she was telling me things that happened to me. And I told her, I was like, I had this clay doll, but it disappeared, blah, blah, blah. She's like, yo, pray and stay away from that girl. I'm telling you, now that you know what she does, she'll never speak to you again. And for sure, guys, she never spoke to me ever again. But after a week, I blocked her because I believed the girl on Instagram. And I stopped talking to her sissy. And she had another friend next week. She had a new friend, and I was like, hey, God protects these souls, shame, because baby girl is recruiting girls for her dad. Ew.
It's time for another spooky story. I am Autumn in Appalachia. If you have a spooky story of your own that you would like to share, feel free to send me a DM. Make sure as well to add me on Facebook, same handle, Autumn in Appalachia. Without further ado. Also, super quickly, I wanted to go ahead and thank you guys for 12,000 followers. We're almost there, and I don't know, it's just wild to me. I just started this channel a few months ago, and here we are, growing quickly in the grand scheme of things. I know 12K may be a smaller platform, but to me, 12K in one room is a lot, and I love our community. I consider you guys friends, and I am so appreciative of everything you do, all the love, the support that you give me, that you give each other. So let's get into the story. This story comes from Brittany. It is bone chilling. She said that she has lived in the apartment she is in since 2021 or 2022, and when she first moved in, it was just she and her son living there. He was 3 or 4 years old at the time. Britt said that from the second she moved into this apartment, there was something about her son's bedroom in particular that always creeped her out. He beat her jeebs, and she didn't know how to explain it. She said that it was just a really dark, like ominous type of feeling. The air feels heavy in there, and it was just so much that she usually, unless her son was in there asleep, kept the door closed at all times. When her son was in there asleep, she would leave the door just barely cracked open. And y'all go ahead and say it with me. What in the Kentucky Fried Hell? Because this next part, y'all. One night, Britt is home. She is asleep in her bed, and it's the middle of the night. She is woken up out of a dead sleep from hearing her son scream from his bedroom, "Mommy, help me. Mommy, help me." Now, logically, she knows her son's not home. Nobody else lives in that apartment. She knows her son is at her mom's house spending the night, but the mom in her, because this is so vivid and real, she is fully awake at this point hearing it. She said the mom in her just reacts, and she sits up in bed very suddenly hearing this because she is about to get out of bed and go check on her son. The second that her body sits upright in bed, some unseen force slams her back down into the bed on her back, and she cannot move. She cannot speak. She said it was almost like sleep paralysis, but like she's fully awake, and she is still hearing her son screaming, "Mommy, help me." So she is trying everything she can just to move, speak, anything, and she absolutely can't. She's paralyzed. Eventually, though, she is able to scream out the word "stop it," and she said that the second that she screamed those words, whatever this thing was released her, and also simultaneously she can hear from her son's bedroom his toys flying out of his toy box and hitting the wall, just slamming into the wall. This made her sick to her stomach. It absolutely terrified her, so much so that she didn't get out of bed. She literally stayed there until it was light outside, and the second that it got daylight and she built up the bravery, she went into her son's room expecting to see the whole thing is just torn all to hell because of how she heard these toys violently slamming up against the wall. And she said that the room was spotless, just like it had been when her son left to go to the mom's house. She, of course, confirms he is at her mom's house. He's not there. She had been home alone, and she doesn't know how to explain it. To this day, she has a hard time, she said, even saying, telling this story out loud, sending it in a text message, anything, because it still gives her that weird feeling in the pit of her stomach. So this night seemed to be the initiation for what is now something that Britt frequently experiences, and not just her. She said that every now and then she'll be home alone with her son, or sometimes home without her son because he's at the grandma's house, and she will so vividly hear her son's voice right behind her, almost like he's standing right in her ear. And she said she'd just be in the living room or the kitchen. She'd have her back turned. She'd hear his voice clear as day, and she knows for a fact it's not him because he's either A, not home at all, or B, he is home but he's in his room. And his bedroom door, it makes a very distinct creak when you open the door, and she knows because the living room is right off his bedroom that he hadn't opened his door, and it's not him standing right behind her. Something that's also super weird is ever since that night, the grandma also is now having experiences at her own house. She was doing laundry in the garage one day, and the son is over there. He's over there, but he's in a completely different area of the house. And she said that she very clearly heard the grandson say, "Grandma, come here." And so she it's very close. She expects him to be right there. She turns around, he's not there. She ventures into the area of the house where he is, and she's like, "Why were you hollering for me?" And he just seems confused and swears he was not yelling for his grandma. So I don't know what to make of this, guys. It almost sounds like there's some sort of an attachment to this boy simply because the grandma is also experiencing it in her own house. And it seems to be like, I don't know, when the grandson is there. I don't know. This is something that is actively going on. Britt said she never experienced anything like this, nor did her grandma, until Britt and her son moved to this apartment in 2021. Britt said they've never physically seen whatever thing it is that is like mimicking her son's voice, but she said that for her, the fact that it only mimics her son, it's definitely like trying to emotionally and psychologically mess with him, because obviously hearing her child like cry for help or something, she's gonna respond to that. Like, it's just a trigger reaction. So even if like she logically knows it is something paranormal, because it's so real, she still feels compelled to get up and go check. And that's pretty much it. That's where the story leaves off. It sounds like a mimic to me. Other people, think it could be like a sign of like demonic activity. We've shared stories that are similar to this, even some of my own personal ones on the page before. I know that shit is real. Even growing up, like I lived way back in the Appalachians in Tennessee. My mom would clear as day hear us kids hollering for her, like yelling for help, and we wouldn't even be home. There's one single time where I had that happen. I heard a family member yell in a very panicked way, like yell my name, and it like echoed through the house. It was so loud, and he actually didn't yell. He didn't make a peep. It wasn't him. So I don't know what to make of it. Really freaking creepy though. Y'all let me know what you think in the comments, what your theories are, and stay tuned for some more spooky stories.
He held people in his home and tortured them for weeks, and no one had any idea. Every single state in the US has had at least one serial killer, if not multiple. And today I'm going to tell you guys about the most notorious serial killer from Missouri. This is a map of all the states I've covered so far in this series. So today, again, we're talking about Missouri, and we are going to be talking about Robert Berdella. He was born January 21st of 1949 in Ohio, but he later moved to Missouri. He grew up not really fitting in with his peers. He kind of was an awkward kid. He had a speech impediment, glasses, and like people picked on him for that, unfortunately. And his father at times was abusive and very, very strict. And his brother, who was more athletic than him, kind of was like the star child, and Robert was not. He always felt like he was never enough. When he reached puberty, he also realized that he was gay. And if realizing you're gay in the 1950s was not already hard enough, being an outcast socially and then having parents that were abusive and unaccepting makes it even harder. So obviously he was closeted for a very long time. As he became an older teenager, he started to become like very aggressive. He was rude and belittled women constantly. He saw women as lesser than, and his father also died of a heart attack, and he had a really hard time with this. So he kind of became more sad and depressed, and then also aggressive and angry at the same time. In 1965, he saw the film based on the novel The Collector, which, if you don't know anything about it, basically there's a man who stalks and abducts women, holds them captive, and then he also like collects antiques. And if you watch Criminal Minds, they actually have an episode based on this novel. And Robert said that that movie always really stuck with him, and it kind of ended up inspiring him in multiple different ways in life, including liking to collect antiques and then also some other horrible stuff. After seeing The Collector, he ends up starting to write to some pen pals from different countries, and he starts like sharing stamps and collecting like other little antiques, and this becomes like a big hobby of his throughout his life. Also around the same time, after his dad had died, his mom remarried, and Robert was not happy about this. He saw this as like a complete betrayal to his family and his father, and he already had a lot of resentment and anger towards women, and this just made it so much worse, and he just started to really resent his mother and pretty much any woman in his life. In 1967, he graduates high school, and even though he struggled as like a teenager to fit in and everything, he actually did really well in school, and he ended up going to college with the goal of becoming a professor someday, and he did well in college as well. His second year into college, though, he started selling drugs, and he started torturing and experimenting on animals. When he was 19, he ended up getting arrested for selling drugs. He only spent 5 days in jail, though, before the charges ended up being dropped because they just didn't have sufficient evidence, but obviously the university is pissed at this, and he ends up voluntarily leaving the school. So he ends
ends up moving and he gets his own place, and this was 4315 Charlotte Street. By the way, at this point now, like that he's graduated in college, he's openly gay. This is not a secret anymore. And he ends up moving into this place, and he says that he had a place in his heart for like runaways and homeless people and workers and stuff like that, and he really wanted to help turn their lives around. So he let many people, especially people living on the street or struggling with drug addiction, to live with him. Some of them would pay rent, some of them would do house chores, and some of them he didn't charge at all. But we learned that part of the reason he wasn't charging some people is because he was exploiting them for work. He would have sex with them, and then he would establish this like position of power and dominance, and he would even like loan money to people and help them out, and he tried to seem like this great guy, but he was exploiting people. They needed help, and he knew that, and he said, I'll help you, I'll be that thing that you need, but you have to give me something in return. People in the neighborhood though didn't know that he was doing this, and they thought he was like a foster parent to the community. Everyone loved him, they thought he was doing great work, they thought he was just like noble in his cause. As he's doing all of this, he's saying he's being a good person, helping out people in the community. He also is becoming an antiques collector, and he starts an antique business that actually ends up being pretty successful. So now he's got like quite a bit of money. And in 1982, he actually starts bringing his stuff to a flea market in the area. So he sets up a booth, and it's called Bob's Bizarre Bazaar. And he meets all of the surrounding vendors, and one of them is a guy named Paul Howell. He had a booth right next to Robert, and he had a son who would come and help him at the flea market, and his name was Jerry. And Robert ends up becoming friends with the whole family. They become buddies, they bond at the flea market, like they see each other every week at this market, and so they become friends pretty quickly. And at one point, the son, Jerry, even gets in trouble with the police for a minor charge, and Robert helps them get out of that and like helps them deal with it. And so they seem like they're becoming close friends. 2 years after he joins the flea market though, on July 5th of 1984, Jerry says that he needs a ride to a dancing contest, and Jerry is now 19, by the way. And Robert, being the family friend, offers to drive him. The family has no problem with this. They've known him for 2 years at this point. They trust him. He seems like a great guy, like no red flags to them. And so he offers to drive him. However, when he gets in his car, he starts giving him alcohol and some different medications, and he gives him like huge amounts of these. And once he's intoxicated, he brings him back to the house. He continues drugging him until he's completely unconscious. Then, if that wasn't enough, he gives him a tranquilizer and ties him to the bed. He ends up holding Jerry captive, tied to his bed, for 28 hours. 28 hours he tortured and drugged and essayed and assaulted this teenager. 28 hours. At one point though, during the like active torture and torment, he starts to gag, and he ends up asphyxiating and dying from the trauma and all of the drugs in his system. And it sounds like at the time Robert didn't mean for him to die, at least not at that point. And so he actually had tried to perform CPR on him, but gave up and dragged his body down to the basement. He ends up suspending his body over a large cooking pot, and trigger warning, all of this is brutal, but this is even more brutal. He ends up draining the blood from his body, and then he dismembers him and wraps him in newspaper and trash bags, and then he puts them in more trash bags and throws them on the curb so that when the garbage collectors come, they will pick up these garbage bags, and his dismembered body will go to the landfill. So now the police are obviously looking for Jerry. This 19-year-old just vanished. He's gone missing. And obviously when they retrace his footsteps and interview family, they find out that Robert was the one who was supposed to give him a ride. So they're thinking Robert might know where he is, or maybe he was the last one to see him before whoever killed him, because again, they don't know it's Robert at this point. So they end up interviewing Robert, and Robert says that he did drive him to the event and that they went their separate ways. We now know, obviously, that that's not true. He never drove him to the event. He just drove him to his house. And we know that he kept a very detailed graphic log of all the things that he did to Jerry. On April 10th of 1985, a 20-year-old named Robert Shelton, who had actually used to stay with Robert. So this 20-year-old Robert guy asks if he can stay with him for a bit and even offers to pay rent. So Robert, the killer, said he was not physically attracted to him, but 2 days after he arrived, he found him intoxicated and he was mad at him for being irresponsible. So he ended up drugging him. He ended up holding him captive and keeping him compliant with a sedative for 3 days. He absolutely tortured this man and experimented on him while he was both awake and unconscious. At one point, and again, keep in mind that this is really brutal things we're talking about, he put swabs of drain cleaner in his eye and would put needles under his fingernails, and he even filled this guy's ears with hardening caulk to try to make it so he couldn't hear. However, 3 days into the torture, he hadn't wanted to kill him yet, but a man came to Robert's house to fix his roof. This was something he had scheduled days before this other Robert guy had even come to stay with him. And so he knows he needs to kill Robert in order for this guy to come in and not find him or find anything suspicious. So before the guy comes to fix the roof, he ends up suffocating Robert, and then once the worker left from fixing the roof, he dismembered him in the bathroom of the 3rd floor of his house. 2 months after he killed this man, Robert was outside in his yard, and he discovers a guy hiding out in his tool shed, and this is during during a thunderstorm and like it's starting to rain. This guy was an acquaintance of Robert's. He kind of knew him. I was just trying to seek out shelter in Robert's shed during the storm. And so Robert acts all nice. He says, come on in, like you can stay inside my house, stay warm there. And he notices that the guy seems really like uptight and stressed. So he offers this guy some medications to help him relax. And the guy happily accepts them because he's like, yeah, I'm really stressed. Thank you so much. And this guy's name was Mark Wallace. And 30 minutes after Mark takes the drugs, Robert says that he decides that he's going to hold him captive as well. Robert takes him captive, he ties him up, and then for an entire day, he torments him with intense electrical shocks to the point that he couldn't even stay awake or conscious anymore. Robert starts experimenting on him with substances and needles, and according to Robert's very detailed log that he's been keeping on all of these things that he's doing, Mark's time of death was June 23rd at 7 p.m. With each murder so far, he somehow increased the brutality and morbid level of torment, and it just keeps getting worse. I will not be getting into every single detail because I don't think TikTok would allow me to, and also like it's just horrific. Like, these people are enduring things for days and days and days, and he's just doing whatever he wants to them, and there's not really always a pattern or a reason. Like, he's just kind of doing whatever he wants or whatever he thinks of in the moment. But the pattern that does stick is that with each person, he is getting worse. He's getting more violent, more scary, more sadistic. What he started out doing is all sorts of levels of horrific. So the fact that he gets worse is so scary. On September 26th of 1985, he's been killing for over a year at this point. He gets a phone call from an acquaintance. His name is James Ferris, and he asks if he can stay with Robert for a few days. He knows Robert has housed people in the past and that he seems generous in the community, so he asks if he can stay. And Robert says, of course you can, and plans to capture him as well. He says that this was the first guy that he actually planned to torture. Up until this point, he had just kind of gone into it without a plan. He had viewed it more as experimenting than torture, and like he wasn't even sure what he was going to do to these men. That's terrifying. All of the horrific things I've already told you about, he just kind of came up with. This next victim, he's going in with a plan. That means it is so much worse than the first few victims. So James comes to stay with him, and that night, Robert makes them a meal, and he ends up putting tranquilizers in his meal and drugs him. After he is incapacitated, he ties him to his bed, and he tortures him for 27 hours straight. 27 hours straight of just torment. And we now know that that's like the shortest amount of time that his victim was tormented. 27 hours is the shortest amount of time that he tormented someone. So during his 27 hours of torment, he was shocked with an electrical shock in his shoulder, and then he also kept putting needles and different substances in him, and he continued to essay and harm him until he could literally no longer function on his own. And in Robert's detailed log, he finally said he 86'd him. Robert had worked in a kitchen for many years, and if you have worked in the restaurant or service industry, you know that 86ing something means to remove it from the menu or take something out, like we're no longer serving it. So him saying he 86'd him is his way of saying that he killed him. On June 17th of 1986, about 9 months after he killed James, he ran into a guy who had stayed with him a few times previously. His name was Todd Stoops, and he was 23 years old. He was a drug addict and an S worker, and in the past, in 1984, so 2 years before, him and his wife had both stayed with Robert multiple times as they were trying to get back on their feet. And they randomly ran into each other at a park, and Robert just kind of takes this as an opportunity. He says like, hey, come over for lunch, we can catch up. And then he also offers to give him money for S work as well. And the guy needed money for drugs, and so he agrees. And Robert says he was super physically attracted to Todd, which is why he ends up holding Todd captive for so long. Todd was his prisoner for 2 entire weeks. 14 days, he endured some of the worst torment and torture and pain that I think a human could ever experience. First, at the beginning, he started drugging him and making him like an S slave, but as the days continue, he wanted to increase his fear and terror because he enjoyed other people's fear. And so he starts to increase the torture, the electrical shocks, he increases the voltage, he starts injecting him with everything. At one point, he literally tried to shock his eyeballs directly. Like, he put the metal devices on his eyes and administered an electric shock. And this was because he was hoping to blind him. Also, injected drain cleaner into his throat, trying to silence him. There are no words to describe how absolutely monstrous evil this man was. More than 7 days in to Todd being held captive, he is starving, dehydrated, bleeding, beaten. A part of his body had been literally ruptured from the trauma, and he's not only physically broken, but he was emotionally broken as well. By the last day that he was alive, he was so weak he couldn't even breathe when he was sitting up, and on July 1st he ended up dying. And later, after he was discovered, there was an autopsy done, and they learned that the reason that he died was because he had become septic a week before due to the rupturing injury that he had. In the spring of 1987, Robert ends up meeting a 20-year-old named Larry Wayne Pearson, and they become friends. They hit it off. Larry ends up staying with him for a while and did housework for Robert. He didn't immediately hold him captive, but he had been planning to do stuff to him this whole time. And so a couple months into his stay, in June, he decides it's time to capture him. On June 23rd, they are hanging out at the house, and Larry had made a comment earlier in the day about hurting gay people, and this is when Robert decided, like, this is time. And he waits until Larry gets intoxicated, and then he injects him with some things, brings him to the basement where he ties him up, and then he puts drain cleaner in his throat. He starts to shock him over and over and over again, and he endured the torture for 5 days. And he tried to comply as much as possible and actually kind of started to get Robert to trust him, that like he wouldn't escape, he wouldn't fight. And so Robert ended up moving him to the second floor of the building. And he said that if he behaved, he wouldn't hurt him as much. And so if Larry behaved the way that Robert wanted him to, Robert would let him stay on the second floor. The torment wasn't as much, and he still was being like hurt by Robert, but it just wasn't to the extreme level of being in the basement. But if he didn't listen to Robert, or if Robert got angry, he would bring him back down to the basement, and the like horrible torture would begin all over again. The amount of time that he held Larry as his prisoner and kept him like captive is absolutely insane. Like, I can't even fathom going through torment for 1 minute, let alone for as long as he held him. He held him for 6 weeks. That is more than 42 days that he just had to endure this like scary, violent man doing whatever he wanted to him. One day, after he'd been held for 6 weeks, Robert ends up getting his man parts too close to Larry's mouth, and Larry bites him hard. Unfortunately, though, this only injures Robert. It doesn't give Larry enough of an opening to escape, and Robert ends up angrily killing Larry in that moment. After he kills Larry, he goes to the hospital to get treated for his wounds, and I have to wonder if anyone at the hospital was like, who is this guy and is he doing something bad? Because it's not common to get bit in that area. If you're getting like injured or bit there, kind of seems like someone's doing that out of revenge, and he probably was doing something inappropriate. So I wonder if anyone at the hospital thought that was weird or tried to report it or anything, because I would definitely be suspicious if someone had that kind of injury. I would think that they had done something and someone retaliated, which is what happened. When he returned from the hospital after getting treated, he ended up dismembering Larry's body, and he kept his head in the freezer for a while before burying him in the backyard. On March 29th of 1988, at 1 a.m., Robert ends up abducting a 22-year-old male S-worker. His name was Christopher Bryson, and he had lured him to his house for S-work. As he enters his house, he ends up knocking him unconscious with an iron bar and then ties him to the bed. And he starts abusing and tormenting him for multiple days. And he had a very similar plan to do what he had done to Larry to Christopher, and just to inflict as much pain and suffering onto Christopher as he possibly could. And Christopher did everything he could to comply and listen to him and try to build up any sort of trust with Robert, so that Robert would not think he was going to run away and put his guard down so that Christopher could escape. So on the third day of being a prisoner, Robert had tied his hands in front of him instead of behind his head to the bed, because Christopher said it hurt for his arms to be tied behind him, and he promised he was not going to run away. And the next day, he ends up breaking free of his restraints because Robert had left a thing of matches that he'd been using previously to torture Christopher. He left them within his reach, and when Robert left the room for a while, Christopher was able to burn the restraints and escape, and he jumped out the second floor window, and he actually broke his foot while jumping, but he was so terrified and driven by adrenaline that I don't even think he cared. He just ran to get help. And by the way, he was on the run wearing nothing but a dog collar. That is all he was wearing. He is so absolutely terrified, and he knows if he doesn't escape, he will be killed. So they end up calling the police, and at first, police are a little bit skeptical about some of the stuff Christopher says, because police never take S-workers seriously, especially if it's a man saying he's been SA'd. People do not take men seriously when they say they've been assaulted. So at first they don't know if they believe him, but they end up like seeing all of his injuries, and they're like, okay, something had to have happened to this guy. Also told the police that the guy who captured him had showed him Polaroids of other men that were deceased, and they're like, okay, we at least need to like look into this. And so that day they get a search warrant for his house, and they find multiple different things that Christopher had told them they were going to find, including multiple different ways of torturing people. They found restraints with the beds, wires, an electrical transformer near the beds. They found syringes, drugs, different like things he had been injecting in them, iron pipes, rope, belts, collars, and more. And then they also found a human skull in one of the closets and one in the backyard. They also ended up finding human vertebrae and then teeth in an envelope. The other horrific graphic thing that they find is 334 separate Polaroids and then 34 more prints of photos of men being tortured or they were deceased in his house. Over 300 photos. He was taking photos of everything he was doing. He also kept that detailed log. So the police found out exactly what he was doing to these people, and it was horrific. It did take them a while to identify some of the men in the photos, and they are all the victims that I had previously mentioned, but they didn't necessarily know their identities right away. But now, obviously, we know who they were. So Robert ends up getting charged with multiple things, including some of the charges that I can't say because I think TikTok will take it down. And he was held in jail with a $500,000 bail, and that is equivalent to $2 million today. That is a very high number to set for bail. First, he pled not guilty. He said he was innocent, blah, 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 blah. They always do. But the death penalty was on the table. And so eventually he's like, I don't want to die. Can we make a deal? And so he takes a plea deal. And in the end, he is convicted in 1988. But in 1992, only 4 years into his prison sentence, he started complaining to prison staff that he was having chest pain. Later that day, he ended up dying at only 43 years old from a heart attack. That's what happens when you do horrible things to people. Your body fails you. Obviously, Robert was a horrible sadist. He hurt so many people, and I'm very glad that he's no longer around to hurt anyone else. But I can't even imagine the fear and the hopelessness that all of his victims felt in the days that they were enduring all of his torture. To him, it was just a game. To him, it was an experiment. It was like he was playing with toys, but these were real people with real feelings and real lives and real loved ones. He preyed on the fact that they needed help and used that to his advantage to keep an upper hand and then capture and harm them.
If you were randomly walking one day and then you saw this specific house in front of you, then what do you want me to tell you, bro? I'm sorry, count your days, it's over. Because in this house right here, the same exact house happened one of the scariest and most terrifying stories you'll ever hear. It all started in 1817 with a guy called John Bell. You see, John Bell was a guy who had a family and a house and a big ass backyard. So one day he was chilling in that backyard, and then out of nowhere a creature appeared in front of him. And this creature who appeared out of nowhere was horrifying. I mean, it didn't even look real. If you're asking why, well, because it had the body of a dog but the head of a rabbit. So when John saw this thing, obviously he was shocked, but then he was like, hold on. The story happened in America, by the way. So when John saw the creature, he didn't hesitate to pull the fully upgraded, customized shotgun and then shoot the creature. So John shot the creature as soon as he saw it. But the problem is, the creature didn't go unalived. It simply disappeared. Yes, and this is where everything starts. Because later that day, or more specifically at night, and when John came back to his house, him and his family started hearing unfamiliar stuff. What I mean by unfamiliar stuff is the knocking on the walls and the scratching sounds all over the house. So the family continuously heard these noises, but they couldn't explain it. So they were like, okay, maybe something is wrong with the walls. But soon enough, everything will change, because you see, John had kids, and his kids, each time they went to sleep and woke up the next day, they noticed something. The kids will simply discover that their bed covers are being yanked off, removed. Another way to say it, meanwhile they're sleeping, somebody else is messing up with their beds. So this was weird as hell, and I'll let you imagine how creepy it is. But you know what? After all, this could happen. When you sleep, you sometimes move a lot, so the bed cover can be moved from its place. So the family again was like, meh. What happened next changed everything. The family couldn't say shit after seeing it. Remember the kids of John? Yes, he had so many of them. Well, every single one of them was getting hit and slapped. Whoa, what's wrong with the parents? Well, let me tell you, that was not the parents. The kids were getting hit, slapped, or even hair pulled by some invisible hands. Got to a point where the kids got red marks everywhere, especially the youngest daughter, Betsy. See, Betsy was the youngest daughter, the little kid. She couldn't defend herself or even run from these hits, so whoever was doing this was targeting her. This is where the whole family were like, nah, we can't let this happen. Invisible hands, a whole fucking ghost. A few weeks later, the whole family heard a voice that echoed all over the house. The voice sounded like an old woman talking, and it basically said one sentence. It said, I wanna unalive John Bell. So when John heard that, I can tell you that he reacted like, bro, why the hell me? What the hell did I do? In that moment, John remembered that something happened with him and his property a few weeks ago. When the family heard that voice, they were desperate for help, so they started calling everyone, even neighbors, hoping for something. When the story started being heard of, neighbors talked about it so much to the point where it became popular. The story became so known to a point where even the president of the USA heard of it. As the US president himself at that time, whose name was Andrew Jackson, heard the story and he was like, Nah, these people are capping. So everybody convinced him. They were like, nah, it's real. I saw it. We saw it. Their kids are getting tossed around. You better go there to see what's happening. So the president's response was like, okay, bet, you know what? Take me to that house. When the president made it to the house, he was like, nah, every single one of you is lying. Can't you see that I'm the president? I got stuff to do. Hold on, let us see. Okay? As soon as he entered the house, the same voice that spoke to the family said something again. This time it said, you can go, Jackson, but I'll see some of you later. So when the President Jackson heard that, he was like, oh no, I'm not staying one more second in this thing. Bring the private jet right now. But sir, it's 1817, there is no private jets yet. Can you please do me a favor, shut the fuck up and bring anything that can get me out of here? Thank you. By 1820, mysteriously and strangely, John became so sick. You know, he was normal one day, then the other day he couldn't walk anymore. And then one morning he was found unconscious with a mysterious black liquid beside him. This is where the voice said something again. It said, I gave him that, he will never get up again. Message to the voice, okay, come on bro, it's not that deep. Okay, he flexed his gun on you and shot you immediately, but you know, you didn't have to do him like that. John got unalived shortly after, and that voice kept singing and laughing at his funeral. If you made it until here, then thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the story, and most importantly, watch yourself tonight. And another thing, from now on, I will start streaming on TikTok, so whenever you see me live, come and say hi, and I'll be reading your messages, so see you there.
2 or 3 weeks ago, an article came out, I think it was The Guardian, and they said that rich people were paying up to $90,000 to hunt children and adults. And the craziest thing about this is I've been talking for probably like a month. I've been emailing back and forth to this man who claims that his ex-girlfriend was basically a bait person to lure him out to this very rich rancher's property where they were planning to kidnap and hunt him. It's an absolutely wild story. Applause. If you don't know who I am, I have a series called Spooky Scary Storytime where I share basically listeners' allegedly true scary stories, and it can be anything from like the paranormal, but occasionally a story like this comes in. Like I've gotten some that's like how I was trafficked. And so when I get a story like this, it's always just like I don't even know how to deal with it. And it's taken so long for me to get the story out because I wanted to make sure I had all the details right because this story is so involved. But basically he met this girl. She was independently wealthy. Like she didn't work. She did have a PhD. She was smart. But he just assumed that she had like generational wealth, and he was working this position that basically required to travel for work. And so he would relocate every 6 months to a year, like sometimes once or twice a year. And so this new job contract is coming up and he ends up getting assigned to this sort of remote location. And because his girlfriend doesn't really work, things are going well, she's going to move with him. She's kind of weird because she basically lures him to this ranch. Like they're staying at a different property. I guess it's not like a very highly populated area, and they're staying at this other house, and then the house almost burns down. And then she basically sends him this list of things she wants. She tells him to go on a booking rental site, and like the first listing has all of these lists and needs and wants that she wants. It's wild how they end up there. But basically he ends up finding out that they knew each other and that they were planning on hunting him. The details of this story are insane. I will probably catch like 500 violations, so I can't post it here, okay? But it's on my other video platform. I have the same username there if you want to hear that story. I honestly have a feeling that I'm probably going to catch a violation just for like posting this. But yeah, discuss. Do you think that there are people that hunt people? Apparently a version of light as a feather, stiff as a board that most people don't play that involves the person who is being the subject, like the board, who is lifted into the air. There's a version of the game where that person recites an incantation that allows a spirit to enter the body while they're in the air. And that spirit is what allows them to levitate. A person named Stacy emailed about this. She said she was at a sleepover growing up. They were playing the game. They wanted to play this game, and one of the girls that's at the sleepover says, you know, have you guys ever played the other version? And Stacy and her friends were like, no, what's that? And so she tells them, and she says, yeah, you have to recite this thing before you go up in the air, and then you allow possession. Stacy said at this point, I mean, she was young. She didn't really know what she was doing. She's like, I guess we were trying to summon demons. Like, I don't know why, but we were down for it. And so she decides she's going to be the subject first, and her friends are all around her chanting. She recites the incantation, lift her into the air with their fingers. And she said as she was in the air, she doesn't know if it was the rhythmic chanting, but she did feel like something was trying to enter her. And she firmly said no. As soon as she says no, she drops back down to the ground. And another friend wanted to try it, but she actually said yes. They were holding her in the air with their fingers. They were all chanting. They heard her whisper yes, and then all of a sudden she seemed to be floating on her own. Stacy swears she actually lifted a few more feet into the air. All the girls started freaking out, all of them started screaming, and their friend dropped back down to the ground. She said we all stopped playing after that, but that feeling of something trying to enter my body never really left me. And then years later, she hears about red door, yellow door, and she says, I guess I wasn't done messing with these things. She decides to play with a friend. She entered as the subject. I've gone into details about how red door, yellow door works in another video, but she comes to a red door. She knew you weren't supposed to open the red doors because something evil was behind it. And she said as she stood in front of this door in this trance-like state, she could feel an evil energetic presence behind the door. She said the only way I know how to describe it, it was very similar to that feeling that I had when I was being lifted into the air when I was playing light as a feather, stiff as a board, and I felt that thing try to enter my body. That I have no other way to describe it, but the energy feels thick and gross, and it feels like something is trying to override everything else you're feeling. But I guess I still didn't learn my lesson because I then dabbled in other games like the chocolate goblins and Ouija boards, but said I believe that psychological fear is a factor with how these games work. But I also believe that your faith has to be stronger than your fear because that's what this stuff is made of and that's what it eats. The more fear you give it, the more it'll sit at your table and beg. She said most of all, she just wants people to know that these energies are not something that anyone should just play with, especially if you're trying to communicate with someone that's passed. If you're really interested in that, there's other ways to do it, but the energy that comes through these mediums, especially Ouija boards, is something that you shouldn't play with. She did say she knows a lot about this stuff, but she does have a burner account, so she's not going to be responding to any comments. But if anyone has any pressing questions, she said she's more than happy to reach out privately if something seems important. If you're new here, Spooky Scary Storytime is the series where I share listeners' allegedly true, scariest, creepiest stories that they think nobody else would believe. So if you have a story, I would love to read it.
It mimics my grandma. So my name is Rosalia from South Africa, Johannesburg. I believe that's how you pronounce it, or Johannesburg. Please forgive me. So one Sunday, me and my grandma woke up very early in the morning so that I can help her get ready for church. I cleaned the house and made breakfast, and she bathed in the bathroom. She eventually finished bathing and eating and went to church. I was left alone since there was nothing for me to do. I did some meditation and mindfulness. Then after, I cooked some lunch dinner and I slept on the couch. Hours into my sleep, I hear the door of the kitchen opening, and in my mind, I'm thinking, oh, it's my grandma. But something was strange. I could feel it. There was something odd about her. I'm an empath, so I definitely know the energies of people who are around me, especially my grandma. She walks in and I look at her. She's like, hey, I'm back. And I said to her, I cooked. Should I dish them up for you? And she says no. I was confused to why she would reject food, but I was like, okay. I go on to ask about church service, and she looks at me with a strange look and says the service was good. As I was talking to her, my intuition told me to look at her outfit, and I realized that my grandma wasn't wearing the church t-shirt when she left. She was wearing her church uniform, which included a blazer, and that scared me because I continued to examine her, and she looked like my grandma, but she wasn't my grandma. And in my mind, I'm like, why didn't I hear the gate open? Because the gate of my house is really loud, and you could tell that someone is coming in, and I'm a light sleeper, so I didn't hear the gate. I started doing a little prayer in my head because I now know this isn't my grandma. After doing that little prayer, I lied to her, or it, that I had to go outside to fetch the mop, and I fucking left the house and the yard and stayed at the neighbor's house, and it was like 7 p.m. when I heard the gate open. I went out, and indeed it was my grandma, and quickly ran to her. She asked me why the house was dark. I asked her if she came in earlier today around 5, and she said no. She got held up at her sister's house, and that's when it hit me, and I told her what I experienced. I continued to experience the mimicking spirit, but I finally got rid of it. If I was put in that situation, like with her, where she's like, I know this is not my grandma, she's praying, and she's like, I'm gonna go outside for the mop, bitch, I would not be able to do that. The way this mimic would know that I knew they were a mimic and probably like just end me on the spot, there's no way I would have been so smart and been like, oh, I'm gonna go get something outside, because I would have been scared, crying, probably like frozen in fear, and yeah, what the fuck. Also, like, how did you get rid of it? We need to know more details. But what do you guys think?
The guy with the files, right? You guys know who I'm talking about, might have a connection to the former CEO of Abercrombie, who was arrested last year on federal and interstate charges. I'm just a girl, not a lawyer, trying to explain this to you guys in just a girl terms. I'm just a girl, you're just a girl. I'm trying to make this easy to understand because I don't think enough people were talking about it. But everything I'm talking about is public information you can find on the internet. Just a girl, not a lawyer. We're going to be referring to the guy with the files as Jay in this video. If you did not know, Jay essentially helped very wealthy people manage their wealth in private. One of his most prominent clients of all time was billionaire Leslie Wexner. Les Wexner, he's the longtime CEO and founder of L Brands, the retail empire that owned different brands such as Victoria's Secret and Bath & Body Works. So his company is the parent company for a bunch of other brands. He's commonly referred to as the king of retail. When Les hired Jay to manage his money, they became buddy-buddy, like inexplicably close, like inseparable almost. Les had had his same financial advisor since 1982. In 1989, so 7 years into them working together, Les said, hey, there's this guy who wants to pitch an investment opportunity to us. Let's meet with him. It was Jay. Les's longtime financial advisor remembers thinking that it was weird that he had not heard Jay's name before because he had been in the industry for so long that he basically knew every single person on Wall Street. But he gave him a chance, so him and Les went to go and meet with Jay. The financial advisor took one look at Jay and thought immediately that he was a fraud. They showed up at his office and there was nothing there, no sign of anyone working, which is a common theme in the mystery of Jay, but only Jay was there sitting at this desk that didn't even have a computer. The financial advisor has said, quote, Jay was trying to explain a currency trade he wanted to do. I have an MBA from Ohio State and I did not understand a word the man said, end quote. Leaving that meeting, the financial advisor warned Les to stay away from Jay, but Les did not listen. He ended up hiring Jay months later. His former financial advisor saying that he could not stand working alongside of Jay because he was the most arrogant person he had ever met in his entire life. He ended up quitting, leaving Les and Jay to work together, and their friendship only got closer and closer over time. Jay gained control over a significant portion of Les's assets, but also gained unusual access to the Victoria's Secret models. He would use this pitch for girls and women, saying that he would be able to make them successful in modeling, but he would only use this pitch to lure them in. And Jay had his partner in crime, GM, just like Michael Jeffries had his partner in crime, Matthew Smith. Okay, stay with me. In 1988, Les bought Abercrombie & Fitch for $47 million in cash, and 5 years into Les and Jay becoming besties, Les handpicked Michael Jeffries to run Abercrombie, and he did so from 1992 to 2014. In 2014, he stepped down. But Les had the money and the power. He was a billionaire. He owned Victoria's Secret, and Jay has been accused of using that connection to make aspiring female Victoria's Secret models his victims. And Les also owned Abercrombie & Fitch, made Michael Jeffries CEO, and Michael has been accused of using that connection to make aspiring male Abercrombie models his victims. So Jay and Michael's cases were completely separate from each other, and they targeted different groups of victims, but obviously a huge connection with Les, but also the similarities of what Jay has been accused of and how he allegedly ran his crimes are so eerily similar to everything that came out about how Michael Jeffries was running his crimes. Again, both had very close friendships with Les, and all I'm going to say is that I would not be surprised if Jay and Michael were also friends. In October of 2024 last year, 80-year-old Michael Jeffries and his partner, 61-year-old Matthew Smith, along with another associate, 71 James Jacobson, were arrested for allegedly recruiting men under the false pretenses of making them Abercrombie models, when in reality what they were doing was putting them through brutal and incredibly disturbing SA. Michael was 80 years old when he was arrested last year, but he was in his late 40s when he was actually the CEO of Abercrombie. So we have Michael Jeffries, he's the former CEO of Abercrombie. Matthew Smith was his partner, also his right-hand man, and James Jacobson was known as the middleman, kind of. The arrest happened because of a lawsuit filed in 2023. 15 men came forward and stated that they were led to believe that they could receive modeling opportunities at Abercrombie if they followed everything that Michael and his partner Matthew would direct them to do. So basically they would say, hey, we can make you an Abercrombie & Fitch model if you do X, Y, and Z, and then they would take the men to recruit them and tell them to do certain things. The allegations state that Michael, Matthew, and James, quote, employed coercive, fraudulent, and deceptive tactics in connection with the recruitment, hiring, transportation, obtaining, maintaining, solicitation, and payment of men to engage in commercial. 8 out of the 15 men who described seeing or being forced to be involved in the said that they were recruited by James, who they also described to be sort of like the middleman. And under U.S. law, means getting a person to travel to another state or country to have or money by using force, fraud, and coercion. When the lawsuit was filed with those massive allegations, it started an investigation to basically fact check what the men were saying, the victims were saying happened. In the investigation, there were emails, detailed travel plans, and flight logs uncovered to support all of their claims. One of the men came forward and stated that he was approached by James, who told him that he knew the owners of Abercrombie and invited him to a meeting. At that meeting, there was a photographer, Bruce Weber. Bruce was a big deal, one of the most prestigious names in fashion photography, working for brands such as Ralph Lauren, Calvin Klein, Vogue, Vanity Fair, and he loved to take pictures of attractive people. Models who worked with Bruce remember having private sessions with him in which he would ask them to wear very little and ask them to breathe and to touch and move their hands wherever they felt their quote-unquote energy. At times, Bruce would move their hands with his own. One model remembers him putting his fingers in his mouth and putting his hands
on him down there. Bruce has denied every single SA allegation made against him. But at that meeting, after talking, James suggested that the model let Bruce take pictures of him, and he claimed that James made it very clear to him that unless he let him perform on him, that he would not be meeting with Abercrombie or with Mike Jeffries. And he was told that he had to do it because that was how, quote, everybody got their start, end quote. When describing this, the victim has said that it felt like James was selling fame and the price was compliance. When he did eventually meet with Michael at his house in the Hamptons, the victim said that he was there to talk about his dreams and aspirations of becoming an Abercrombie & Fitch model. And after he got done talking with Michael and Matthew, Michael held something underneath his nose. It was a which can cause a strong head rush and disorientation, and then he had sex with him. As far as the other things that were also mentioned in the lawsuit, those allegedly included performing sex on Michael and Matthew and calling them tryouts. That happened only after James found the men, took pictures of them, forwarded the photos to Michael and Matthew to see if they liked the way that they looked. They were also allegedly ordered to wear costumes and use toys to prepare for those particular acts. They were ordered to change their looks to look their best and up to the standards of Michael and Matthew, one victim stating that they shaved his area down there without any notice, and others supporting that, saying that there was a personal groomer hired to intimately shave their body hair, which felt incredibly dehumanizing. They were given substances to make the men more compliant and causing them to be physically incapable of resisting anything. Substances also to make them so out of it to make them unable to say no if they did not want to do something. And other substances to make them physically able to perform even if they were not willing to. Does that make sense? Do you get what I'm saying? They, of course, had to sign NDAs, and while they were there, wherever they were, they had to give up their phones, wallets, and sometimes clothing. Those would be taken from them and held in an inaccessible location during the event. And Michael and Matthew were also accused of operating a quote-unquote referral system that rewarded the male models who recruited other male models to meet with Michael and Matthew, and if they did successfully recruit other men, they would be rewarded, but that had to be earned. But a reward, if they did what they were told, meant that they would go to these parties that Michael also attended and at times spent $1 million to host. Men who attended those parties said that Michael and Matthew would engage in activity with multiple men, about 4 men or more, and or that they would direct them to have with each other. Afterwards, staff members at those events would hand them envelopes filled with cash, thousands of dollars in cash. And if they said no to any demands, Michael would very quickly remind them that he could end their modeling careers with a snap of his finger. A lot of the men who have come forward stated that they felt like they got to a point in which Michael and Matthew were supporting them financially, leaving them to feel like they had to do what was asked for them or else they would be in debt to Michael. Michael had a house in the Hamptons, and allegedly a lot of his events and parties would be held there. Staff members later claimed that they were instructed to leave and completely vacate the premises every single Saturday for years because their boss Michael was having quote-unquote playtime. When they returned, the house was always clean, but weirdly clean, like sterile, like a hospital. Allegedly, this happened from 2008 to 2015, and Michael used millions of dollars to be able to facilitate this, traveling throughout the US and internationally in order to recruit his victims and or host his parties. Some of those places included New York, London, Paris, Venice, and Morocco. And he used employees, contractors, and security professionals to help him with everything to get it done and to make sure that nobody ever found out about it. I don't know about you, but that to me sounds like almost exactly the same to not only the things that Jay did, but also the other music module whose name rhymes with Liddy. And Michael Jeffries was able to do what he did because he had the power and the connections, and he was seen as this incredibly successful guy who managed to turn Abercrombie & Fitch into the massive enterprise that it became. And I know a lot of you guys that watch my videos are around my same age, and Michael Jeffries allegedly was doing all of this from the time that I would have been in middle school until about my freshman year in high school. And yeah, Abercrombie & Fitch was seen as the coolest thing ever. When I was in middle school, like, it was really dominating the industry. And by the way, Abercrombie then and Abercrombie now, completely different. I'm currently obsessed with Abercrombie. I love their stuff now. But it goes without saying that Michael Jeffries is a despicable man. He's a strange dude overall. He has really weird things that he would do, such as going through revolving doors twice, never passing his employees down the stairwells, parking his Porsche every single day at the same angle in the parking lot, leaving the keys in between the seats and the doors always unlocked. He also had a pair of lucky shoes that he would wear anytime that he would read financial reports. His biggest obsession, though, was his vision of the perfect all-American kid. And back then, Michael Jeffries would flat out say that his target market was targeting the cool, popular kids. A psychologist described it as, quote, they were selling the most popular people in class, the quarterback and the head cheerleader, end quote. And Michael himself said, quote, we hire good-looking people in our stores because good-looking people attract other good-looking people, and we want to market to cool, good-looking people. We don't want to market to anyone other than that. In every school, there are the cool and popular kids, and there are the not-so-cool kids. Candidly, we go after the cool kids. We go after the attractive, all-American kid with a great attitude and a lot of friends. A lot of people don't belong in our clothes, and they can't belong. Are we exclusionary? Absolutely, end quote. And they absolutely did deliberately leave out certain people or groups. For example, the stores did not sell clothes for women larger than a size US 10. They did for men, but not for women on purpose. Stores also would not get in trouble by Michael if their numbers or their sales were down, but they would get in trouble if the employees that they hired were not good looking enough. Stores had to pick their 10 most attractive employees, take pictures of them, send them over to corporate, and corporate would approve them and make those 10 people be at the front of the store. A former manager said, quote, the thinner, more conventionally attractive you were, the closer you were to the front, end quote. And the most quote unquote facially symmetric people were also put at the front of the store to fold the t-shirts and be there to greet the guests. Any employee who gained a significant amount of weight was fired or just taken off the schedule completely. In 2003, when Michael was CEO, Abercrombie faced a lawsuit by several thousand former employees and job applicants who alleged that the company had turned people down from working there because their look was quote-unquote not Abercrombie enough. Abercrombie settled that lawsuit for $40 million, but they never admitted to any wrongdoing. And you can tell that attraction is what he was going for, which is why, even though it's a clothing company, in a lot of the branding and the marketing, the male models were not wearing much of it. And do you guys remember when they would have male models standing outside of the front to greet people? I clearly remember that. And they always had abs, and their abs were always showing. He didn't only use the models for the look that he was going for. Michael went for that entire vibe with the nightclub dark interior with the A&F cologne literally being hosed around and sprayed on every single rack of clothing. Apparently every single hour the employees had to go around spreading the cologne to keep that signature smell potent. The photo shoots of the models and even the photos that were put on the shopping bags, they all had that black and white look to them, featuring partially dressed young people. Now knowing everything that was happening with the models behind the scenes, it is so incredibly disturbing. It makes me sick. So the arrest obviously happened a decade after Michael Jeffries stepped down as CEO, because only then did the victims feel safe enough to come forward and speak out. But a big question following the arrest was, how much about this entire thing did the executives at Abercrombie & Fitch really know apart from Michael and Matthew? Well, Abercrombie says that they had no idea, but it is important to know that having access to the things that he did definitely facilitated Michael in him being able to do what he did. Not to mention, he was not only the CEO, but also the chairman of the company for 22 years. He spent millions of dollars hosting these parties, not only funding the actual party, but also to pay for entertainers and hotel rooms. He also used the corporate jet excessively. In 1 year alone, because of Abercrombie, Michael made $71 million. So the question is, were others in the company not involved but aware of what the money was being used for? As far as who else was involved, we don't know, but it's reported that at these parties and events, Michael and Matthew would have guests that have only been described to as being their quote-unquote friends. At one of the largest events that he hosted, he held it in a private villa in a 5-star hotel. In 2011, he flew dozens of men to Morocco, and him and Matthew invited these friends. One of the men that was flown to Morocco to be an entertainer was only going because he was under the impression that he was just going to go there to dance, but not that he would be physically involved with anyone there. He was just going to perform, to dance on his own and then leave, and he decided to do so because he needed the money to be able to support his family. But when he was there, moments into his dance, Michael came on to him. And the next thing he remembers is falling asleep and waking up with something inside of him, leading him to believe that he had been and 80-year-old Michael pleaded not guilty to 16 criminal charges in a New York federal court, and he put up a $110 million bond. He was released and walked out of there smiling. If convicted, he is facing a maximum sentence of life in prison and a minimum sentence of 15 years. However, his case has been put on pause. It was put on pause this past summer in May of 2025 because a judge ruled that Michael was mentally incompetent to stand trial after it was determined that he suffers from Alzheimer's disease, diseased and dementia and has residual effects of a traumatic brain injury. His issues were described as progressive and incurable, making him unable to assist in his own defense. The judge ruled for him to be hospitalized for treatment and then be reevaluated to determine if his competency could be restored, but that does not look likely. Matthew and James have also pleaded not guilty to all charges. Matthew was released in a $10 million bond under conditions including home detention and GPS monitoring. James was also released on a $500,000 bond and is under home confinement with GPS monitoring. And again, everything I just talked about is alleged, and all three of them are presumed innocent unless and until proven guilty. Yeah. Hopefully this video does not get taken down because I'm eager to see what you guys have to say. Anyway, that's all for today. Thank you for spending time with me today. I love you guys so much. Hope you're having the best day ever. If not, go do something to make your day better. Go get yourself a little treat. Make yourself happy. Make somebody happy. And I will see you in my next video. Massive kiss on the forehead to every single one of you. 2 kisses.
I wasn't sure if I was even going to talk about this story because it literally goes against literally everything that I believe in, but I'm going to go ahead and talk about it because I feel like it should be more of a cautionary tale. And it does have to do with brujeria. Melissa has a little sister named Kelly. Melissa has always been completely jealous of Kelly because Kelly was like the pretty one. She was the skinnier one. Like she always had everything. She always got everybody's attention, especially with her family. So Melissa always felt some sort of way about Kelly. They started working at this video store together, Kelly and Melissa. There was this new guy that started working at the video store as well. Let's call him Eduardo. Melissa had a really big crush on Eduardo. Before she even had a chance to really like pursue him, one day she sees Kelly leaving with Eduardo. Eduardo was giving Kelly a ride home. After that, Kelly and Eduardo became an item, which really pissed Melissa off. Over time, like her hatred or her jealousy for her sister kind of grew, and she continues to just become more and more bitter. Her sister Kelly actually ended up marrying Eduardo. Not long after, Kelly got pregnant by Eduardo and gave birth to a little boy. Within her pregnancy, she had a bunch of health complications, which led her to gain a ton of weight. This was completely new for Kelly. She had never not being like the perfect size, so she really did struggle with losing weight, which made Melissa extremely happy. She said that she noticed when Eduardo was kind of like not as attracted to Kelly. I guess he wasn't as affectionate as he typically was with Kelly, and Melissa saw this as her way in. Mind you, they were still working at the video store. Kelly was now home with the baby. Eduardo now became manager of the video store, and Melissa still worked at the video store. So being that Eduardo and Melissa now work together, Melissa used this time to try to kind of like throw her advances at him, or like try to like hint that she was interested or like flirt with him, but he never like ever like listened to her. He would kind of just blow her off. Becoming desperate, she decided to go to a curandera, and she told the curandera the whole story. Well, she says that before she even like told the curandera what she was there for, the curandera already knew. She told her, "You're here because you're in love with someone who does not belong to you. His heart does not belong to you. His heart belongs to someone close to you." Of course, she explained the situation. The curandera told her that she would go and help her, but with a price. And this was something that was going to be like a forever thing, that she could never just not do this. She would always have to do this. The curandera went and did her whatever it is that she does. I don't want to give into detail as to like what the curandera did because I don't want to give anybody any ideas, but she did her thing and it worked. Not long after, Eduardo started to show interest for Melissa. Mind you, Kelly's still at home. She's still recovering. The flirting kind of progressed to them becoming a little physical, making out, and not long after, they were meeting up at hotels for... Melissa felt like this wasn't enough. She wanted the life that her sister had. She wanted Eduardo all to herself. She didn't want to just be like the side thing. So she went ahead back to the curandera and asked the curandera for an even stronger spell to pretty much make him like completely blind and only want her and only see her and completely forget about his responsibilities and even his own son. The curandera did as she said, and Eduardo almost became obsessed with Melissa. Like it was almost like he couldn't stop thinking about her. He would constantly call her, he would constantly text her, he was constantly blowing her up, he constantly wanted to see her. One day he told her that he wanted them to run away together. Melissa was so head over heels that she decided to kind of go ahead with it, put her family to the side, forget about her sister, forget about everybody, and they took off. Like they ran away together to a completely different town. They started a whole new life together. Not long after, Melissa was now pregnant with Eduardo, and they continued a new life where no one knew them there, so no one knew their backstory, no one knew how they actually had gotten together. As of right now, I guess the brujeria has worked. But Melissa does say that every so often or every couple of months, she has to go back to that same curandera. She has to travel back home to get the spell reinforced because it starts to fade. She starts to feel him cold and distant, and she knows that it's time to reinforce the spell. So for as long as she lives, she's going to constantly have to like keep this up, or she's always going to have to need the curandera's help. Not sure what's going to happen if the curandera happens to pass away, but... So yeah, if someone's not meant for you, they're just not meant for you. There's so many other options out there. Brujeria should always be your last option, especially when the person's already taken and he's married to your freaking sister. And I have sazon on my hands because I was cooking. So be careful as to who you call your friend, especially as to who you invite into your own home. Javier and Carmen owned a small produce shop where they sold fresh vegetables and fresh fruit. Their shop became so successful that there would literally be people waiting outside in line for them to open because they always sold the best quality at the best prices. Things were really looking up for them. They were making a ton of profit until one day Javier's childhood friend named Damien happened to stop by the shop. When Damien showed up, Javier can tell that there was something really wrong with Damien. He looked extremely skinny. He looked sick. He looked really, really down. Like he was really going through it hard. Damien congratulated them on the success of their business and asked if there was any way that they could hire him for any sort of position, that he had tried everything that he possibly could to get a job, but that no one would hire him. He went as far as actually trying to do witchcraft in order to get people to hire him, and still no one would hire him. Like he was literally living on the streets and didn't have a penny to his name. Javier, feeling sorry for him, decided to go ahead and tell him, hey, we can make a position for you. You can just help us unload some of like the produce. We even have a spare bedroom that you can stay at until you get on your feet. Everything was perfectly fine at first. Damien proved to be a very good employee. He would help out, he would clean up, he would go above and beyond. It wasn't until one day Javier noticed that Damien and his wife Carmen were getting a little bit too personal with each other. He would catch them sometimes almost making flirtatious like gestures to each other, like inside jokes. Like it was getting a little bit out of control. Javier, thinking that maybe it was just all in his head, he decided to kind of ignore it until one day Damien came up to him and said, hey, I really appreciate you helping me out and giving me this position, but now that I have saved some money, I actually want to go ahead and open my own business. Damien told him that he didn't want it to feel like a competition against each other, like a rivalry, that he really just wanted to try things out on his own. Javier went ahead and gave him his blessings, and Damien went on his way. A few blocks over, he went ahead and opened his small little shop. Not long after Damien left and started his own shop, Javier started to notice that the fruits and vegetables from his shop would rot really fast. So fast that he wasn't even able to make any profit of it. He would end up having to throw most of it away. Along that was his wife Carmen. She became very, very distant. She wasn't really like as affectionate with him or even intimate with him. Like she wanted nothing to do with him until one day, like very angrily, she told him that she did not want to be with him anymore, that she felt like he was a failure and that their business was falling apart and that she wanted to leave him. She left to go work for Damien. This, of course, broke Javier's heart. His business just continued to decline to the point where, like, all of his customers left and went to Damien's shop. Things got so bad that Javier ended up having to shut down his shop because he was losing so much money. This pushed him into, like, drinking all the time. He was super depressed. He wasn't leaving the house anymore. Like, he lost a ton of weight. Like, he wasn't himself at all. Then he started to hear the rumors that Carmen and Damien were actually a couple now, that they were very affectionate with each other at his shop, that they would always be kissing and hugging, and that she was now his partner. Devastated, one day Javier felt like he wanted to just kind of end it all. Like he was just so devastated and so depressed that he went out and contemplated unaliving himself. Thankfully, that day he ran across one of his old customers, like one of his old loyal customers. When the lady saw him, she was like shocked by his appearance and went ahead and gave him a hug and told him, listen, I don't know what's going on or how things got this bad so fast, but I believe that it has to do with brujeria. I feel like you should go see a curandera. Javier remember how Damien had mentioned that he even tried witchcraft to like be successful and it didn't work. It kind of clicked in his head that Damien must have done some sort of witchcraft on him to like steal his success for then Damien to be successful. He went ahead and visited with a curandera that the lady recommended. The curandera, as soon as he walked in, she told him that they had been I don't know if I can say this on here without the video get taken down, but someone had put a hex on him so strong that they wanted him with nothing. They wanted everything that he had, and they wanted him to just disappear. With the help of the curandera, this took a lot of time. It wasn't like a quick limpia. Like it was a long process to get this hex off of him. He was finally able to be freed from this thing that was literally taking over his life. Not long after, he managed to scrape some money together and he opened up his own little shop in a different location. The curandera told him not to open it in the same place where he had his previous one because that place was already jinxed. He started very, very small with very small amount of produce, but little by little his clientele followed him back. Now, this whole time, he had no idea what had gone on with Damien and Carmen. Like, he didn't know. As far as he knew, like, they were still successful and things were looking up for them until it started to get back to him that apparently Damien's business was not failing. And it was his fruit and his vegetables that were not rotted and people no longer wanted to go and, like, shop over there. Not long after Damien ended up having to shut down his business, Javier heard that Damien became so enraged by his failure that he took it out on Carmen. And apparently, he was being, like, physically abusive towards her. One thing that I forgot to mention that the curandera told him is that the reason why Carmen left Javier and went with Damien is because Damien did a very, very strong love spell on her to get her to leave Javier. But Javier didn't want to get involved in that. His main concern was cleansing himself. Javier doesn't really know what ended up happening with Carmen. As far as he knows, she ended up leaving Damien because Damien became so, like, abusive towards her. All Javier knows is that one day, as he's at his little shop, his very successful shop, he sees Damien sitting across the street looking completely run down. He said he looked like a homeless person, just sitting there staring at his shop. That would be the last time that he would ever see him because he ended up hearing that Damien actually ended up going over to the train tracks. And so yeah, be careful who you help. Not everyone's your friend. Javier did also get remarried and is very happy with a family of his own now, so he's moved on.
Let's read some more scary stories that were sent to us. This one's going to be pretty long, so this would be a good one to listen to in the shower while you're going to sleep. It's going to be a long one. About 7 years ago, my husband and I were having a movie night in the living room with our sons, ages 7 and 6. We brought our big king-size mattress into the living room so we could all sleep on it. My daughter was 2 at the time and went to bed earlier, so she was in her room sleeping in her crib. Everyone was sleeping at this point, and I was the last person awake by the time the movie was over, so I got up to shut everything off and went to go check on my daughter. She was asleep in her crib, so I shut the door and went and laid on the bed with my husband and sons. About 20 seconds after shutting my eyes, my son kicked me in his sleep, so I opened my eyes and sat up a bit to adjust myself away from him. I noticed something out of the corner of my eye on the couch, and when I looked over, it was my daughter sitting on the couch with her back towards me, staring at the black TV screen. Immediately, I knew it wasn't her because she was too small to crawl out of her crib, and even if she could, I would have heard some sort of noise, but the house was dead quiet. I stared at this thing for a long time, and I even pinched myself and blinked many times, and it never moved or disappeared. I finally just had to hide under the covers because I was so freaked out. When I peeked out 10 minutes later, the thing was gone. No clue what that thing was, but I haven't seen it since. Hell to the no. What was that? For background context, when I was little, I would sleepwalk very often, and if anyone spoke to me during this, I would become violent and throw things or yell at them. I would never remember these episodes until someone told me about it in detail. Then I would remember it faintly, the way you would remember a dream. As I grew up, this stopped. However, one day after high school, my sister and I were in the living room. She was a senior and I was a freshman. I was taking a nap on the couch and she was watching TV next to me. During my nap, I sat straight up and asked my sister, "Who's that?" And my sister replied, "Who's who?" It was just us home at the time. I looked to the other couch and said, "Wait, where did she go?" And I went right back to sleep. This was the first episode of sleepwalking I had had since elementary school. Like before, I didn't remember until she told me later that night. I remembered that I saw a woman sitting on the other couch just looking at us and smiling. We forgot about this until now, about 6 years later, and that woman looks exactly like my sister does now. When this first happened, my sister had very long hair and never wore makeup. The woman I saw had short hair and was very feminine, which is exactly how my sister looks now. Okay, so I don't know if that one is really, like, scary, like, in, like, a bad way. Maybe that was, like, her sister from, like, a parallel universe or something, or her sister's, like, higher self, like, coming and checking on them. Kind of creepy, yes, but also kind of cool. I'm from Central Illinois, a small town surrounded by small towns. I live in a fairly new area and my parents built our house. My grandma died when I was 2 and this happened when I was 6. My room is in the basement. If you come down the stairs and take an immediate right, it's the door to my room. If you go to the left, there's a hallway. Back then, there were 2 chairs in that hallway. The way my room was set up, I could see down the hallway from my bed. So when I was 6, I woke up one morning and I could see my grandma sitting in one of those chairs just looking at me. I got up to go see her, but when I left my room, she was just gone. I was right outside my door, so I just ran up the stairs to tell my parents. They didn't believe me and told me I was just dreaming. That was 12 years ago, and I still remember exactly how I felt, and I know there was no way I could have dreamt all of that and slept walk out into the hallway. That was the only time I ever saw her, and my parents never believed me, even though I've told them the exact same story for years. However, when I was 14, my dad and I were driving around the countryside for fun. We came across a cemetery and decided to drive through it. The earliest graves were from the 1800s. We were walking around when all of a sudden we saw this girl who looked like she was straight out of the 70s. We were in the middle of nowhere. There were no other cars. She literally came out of nowhere. We both watched her walk across the cemetery. We looked at each other, and when we looked back over, she was gone. It was so scary, we immediately left and called my mom. That was 4 years ago, and she still doesn't believe us. They both still don't believe me about my grandma, but I know what I saw both days. Also, when I was 14, I was home alone and in the basement. I walked into my bathroom, which is directly across from the chairs in the hallway. Right before I turned on the light, I felt this absolutely freezing hand grab my arm. I literally screamed because it scared me so bad. I grabbed my arm where I had felt the hand, and my arm was cold to the touch. I've never told anyone that because I feel crazy saying it. I turned around and no one was there. That's happened at least one other time since then, and it also happened in that bathroom. Okay, first of all, why is the mom not believing you, especially when you had a paranormal experience with your dad? Like, you have a witness that spirits and ghosts do exist. And hopefully the cold hand grabbing your arm at the end was hopefully your grandma and not something else. But I would be freaked out. I would have to move out of the basement. I couldn't stay down there anymore. Let's read some scary Reddit stories. I used to rent a room in a basement apartment. My friend's family lived in the real house upstairs, which is how I ended up there. They have a lot of family parties. They're first-generation Filipino, so family parties are a frequent thing. One day, I was doing some homework in my room. The other 2 tenants weren't home, so I had apartment B to myself. But my friend's family was being so loud upstairs, I was having trouble focusing. So much chatter and feet moving around, it sounded like dancing was going on. I texted my friend, "You guys sound like you're really having a good time up there. I'm not really getting anything done. Can I come up?" He texts back, "No one is home. We went to Wisconsin for the weekend." I went outside, saw that no one's car was there and no lights were on in the house. And then I just went for a walk until someone else got home. Yeah, I wouldn't stay in that house by myself either. I'd be leaving. In late 2015, I was laid off from my job at the zoo and was staying with my grandparents for a couple of months. My grandparents have 2 little dogs, and because Grandpa worked nights and Grandma was away in Texas for a month, they were really glad to have someone around to feed and walk the dogs during the day. One night, I'm home alone, I'm relaxing in the tub, when all of a sudden, through the skylight in the bathroom, I can hear whispered, hushed voices that can only be coming from the back porch. I think I must be hearing things, but then both dogs start barking their heads off. My blood runs freezing cold and I leap out of the bath, pull my clothes on, and run to the porch, but whoever was there was already gone. I took a shovel and walked the perimeter of the house but found nothing. After that, Grandpa updated the security system. In 1977, an Alberta couple wanted a pump for their septic tank, and they decided to take the pump from the tank of their old abandoned farm instead of buying a new one. In doing so, they discovered an unalived body that was thrown in there. The victim's story is very horrific. He was tortured and schmexually mutilated before he was pew-pewed, then thrown in the septic tank of an abandoned farm hoping that the crime would never be discovered. The victim was identified in 2021, but the unaliving is yet to be solved. That one is really scary, and it reminds me of that thing that happened in Los Angeles where that girl was found in the tank, like above the building. That's really scary and really sad.
Let's read some more scary stories that were sent to us. I don't have a soda today, but I do have a drinkable yogurt. Have y'all ever had this before? These are so good. I like the mango one better, actually. But 30 grams of protein? Fire. Me and my parents lived in a relatively small apartment in Austria. The windows in my parents' room faced the street. So one night when I was 13 at around 3 o'clock, my mom woke up thinking that someone was ringing the door to the house. She brushed it off because she didn't continue hearing it after she woke up. She went to go get a glass of water and then she went back to her room. For some reason, my dad, who is a very deep sleeper, was also waking up. My mom asked him if he had heard the rings too, and he said yes. Suddenly, the ringing began again. For around 10 continuous minutes, the doorbell rang. My parents decided to look outside their window, but they couldn't see anybody. As soon as they walked away from the window, someone started knocking on it frantically. My parents called a few people, like for instance my grandparents, to see if it was them, but it wasn't. The knocking on the door in the window continued for around 40 more minutes. The creepiest part is that the next day, the front door lock was broken, and around that time many break-ins had happened in our area. This person also sent me a second story. When I was young, around 4 years old, I had to go to the toilet at night, so my mom took me to the toilet because I was too scared to go alone. While I was in the bathroom, my mom stood in front of our backyard door, which is made of glass. It was winter and there was a lot of snow. Suddenly, my mom noticed huge footprints in the snow and an imprint of a face on the glass door, as if someone had pressed their face against the door to look inside. Okay, y'all know that like home invasions are my worst nightmare, so these are terrifying. I would have a heart attack if someone was knocking on my door in the middle of the night, and I would have a heart attack and then move out if I saw an imprint of somebody's face on my glass door. Absolutely not.
So this week, I decided to read some of the stories that I usually read like on my own time and don't share with you guys. Because honestly, I'm like, wait, these stories are so good. Why do I not make videos out of these? So I hope you like them. If you don't, I'm sure you'll let me know. And yes, they're creepy, scary, and just wait. This story is called 3 a.m. My cousin recently moved here from India. On a recent road trip exploring America, we were shooting shit and exchanging ghost stories and laughing at similarities and differences between American ghost stories and Indian ghost stories. When I asked her if she's ever experienced anything supernatural, her eyes widened and she averted her eyes to the window. Just when the silence was about to be too much for me, she softly responded, "Yes, a few. One is troubling." And this is her story. When I was the second year in college, I stayed at an all-girl hostel. I made many friends. We were all very happy to be in school, away from our conservative parents. The hostel was so much fun, but it was a very, very old building. Electricity was only put in the room. Sometimes candles were placed along the windows if a watchman was present, but normally once you left the rooms, you were faced with complete darkness. It's common to wake up someone if you needed to walk down to the restroom at the end of the hall. We all had a childish fear of being alone in the dark. One night, I had to use the restroom. It was around 3 in the morning. I went to my friend's bed and tapped her on the arm. She immediately opened her eyes as soon as I touched her. I apologized for bothering her and told her I needed to pee. She smiled at me and hopped out of bed. All the way down the hallway, she laughed and danced. I could not see her at all, but her bangles clanked together loudly and the bells on her ankles jingled softly. It was very calming. I laughed and sashayed my hips down the hallway with her, too tired to match elaborate arm movements. She said nothing to me, though occasionally I heard her hum one of our favorite Bollywood songs. The same thing happened on our return. I fell back asleep easily. I awoke fairly late the next morning to the sound of men in our room. They surrounded her bed. I bolted from my bed, prepared to protect my friend, when I realized they were ministers of the college. I peered over closer. My friend's lifeless eyes were fixated on my bed. The same smile on her face. She ended her life. Her time of death was 11:30 p.m., almost 5 hours before I woke her to go to the restroom with me.
We had this mayor when I was in high school. He was a bad man. Bad man. Started off good though. Became very, very bad. My grandma Minnie, may she rest in peace, met this man while he was on his campaign the first time around. He came to our church. And when she shook his hand, she stepped away from him. By the time he got around to where the little kids was, her and a couple of the other elders, all who were ladies of Peter and Clay. It's Freemasonry through Catholicism. If you want to know more about it, don't ask me, ask Google. I'm not getting into that. Anywho, they stood in front of us. Like, they really didn't let him get too close to us. And I noticed that. Like, I noticed it instantly. Certain things you just don't bring up outside of your house because there are monitoring spirits everywhere and they hear every fucking thing. But something that my grandma said loud and clear was, don't touch that man. I looked at her. She looked at me. And I was like, a talk for when we get home. She said, yes, ma'am. Enough said, Granny. Thank you. When we get home, my granny told me, go on to the grocery store and get some collard greens because we got to eat something clean tonight. So boom, now I'm back at home, right? And me and my grandma is cleaning these collard greens. And as she cutting the stem off these collard greens, she says, you know why I told you not to touch him? And I was like, yeah, because the shadow man was standing on his left side. My granny stopped cutting and instantly made eye contact with me. She said, what you say, little girl? I said, yeah, I don't know what he got on him, but it's definitely a shadow that stands over his left shoulder at all times. I can see it. I wasn't gonna let him touch me no way. She said, okay, good. Okay, you seeing correctly. My granny said, that's pure greed. Literally, greed personified. It need a host. Don't touch nobody if you see them with that on their shoulder. Fast forward a couple of months later, I had to go to the city building because I had to go get birth certificates and stuff. Right? As soon as I come upstairs from the red line on Monroe, it felt wrong. Like, it felt like depression and gloom. Like, you know how it feels when you walk outside and it's real hazy and it's kind of rainy and it just feel kind of heavy. Take away the haze and the rain and we have to add in the sun feels filtered. Like it's shining a grayish blue light down on the ground and it doesn't feel warm. It doesn't feel cool. There's absolutely no breeze. There's no smell in the air, but like it feels wrong. I'm standing on the corner of Monroe and State and I'm like, I don't like this. I get to walk in west so that I could go over to Dearborn. Literally, just going from one side of State Street to the other side of State Street, I felt frozen. A lady, little old lady, by the way, everything about her gave me Russian grandmother. Like, she was little, she's a little hunched over, she got a silk scarf around her neck and a cute little peacoat on, and she got her little basket, and she says to me, be careful, star child, today isn't a good day to play. In Russian, she says, stay in the light. What we dealing with down here today? That lady finally looked up at me and she had pure crystal blue eyes. She said, we don't know. We're trying to figure it out, but it's warded. Who the hell is we? Do I need to go home? She told me no. You scheduled to be down there. You got passage. Go to the building, get your shit, go home. You ain't gotta tell me. You ain't gotta tell me. Bye. Now I'm power walking to get to the city building. As I get to Dearborn, I cross over the street to get to the other side of Dearborn and I'm walking. At this point in time, I come into the shadow of the Chase building. I'm almost to the side doors that's on Dearborn, and this really tall, really stocky white man come walking out, and he just stopped in the middle of the walkway. Now, usually that wouldn't throw me off, but he stopped and turned my way. What's the wrestler name? He sound like the people who make coffee. Barista Batista. Batista? That's his name, Batista. This white man is huge, standing there in all black. I'm talking about black dress shirt, black dress pants, black boots, black long trench coat, just cocky as shit like Batista. I stop in my tracks. The side of his mouth hitched up a little bit. In the back of my head, I'm thinking, what the fuck? And then the other side of his mouth lift up to his ear. Oh, absolutely the fuck not. Like a beacon of hope, literally, it's a break in the clouds, and across the street is some sunshine. When I tell you I hightailed it into the sunlight, I stood there and looked at him. He looked at me. The smile was gone. Oh, yeah? Babushka just told my little black ass to stay in the light. Well, I see why. I get to walking. The light get to going with me. Yeah, we staying on this side. Hallelujah. Amen. As I'm still walking down Dearborn and I'm trying to get to this motherfucking city building, I look up and I can literally see black beings jumping across the buildings. I stop at the corner. First of all, it's a red light. I don't know about nobody else. I'm not jaywalking downtown. I value my life. So I'm standing straight, but like trying to look up without letting them know I'm looking up. I just look slow as hell. But I can see these motherfuckers, okay? They is moving. At first I thought they was coming for me, but they not coming for me. They on a mission. I hear my mother's voice say, "Get going, little one." And girl, you ain't gotta tell me. You ain't gotta tell me. You going to stay in the afterlife, because in this life, I'm gonna protect man. I already been told I got my clearance. I'm mad at my motherfucking business. I'm gonna stay in the goddamn life. I get to the birth certificate office, and the security guard that is there, look at me and start turning red. I looked at him. I said, "Look, I don't want no smoke. I got a reason to be." Without moving his mouth, he say, "Hurry up." Every bit of his voice grumbled through my whole entire body. And it wasn't just me. It was the lady that was standing behind me too. She literally looked at him and was like, "Oh, why so rude? Girl, if you don't shut the fuck up. Girl, if you don't shut the fuck up, you don't know who you talking to. Please, 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 please leave the vampire alone. Please leave him alone. Leave him alone." I looked at her and I'm like, "Ma'am, it's okay. We fine. Let's go." I get to the desk. The lady at the desk is looking at me. She says, "ID." I hand her my ID. She put these fingers around my ID that looked like fucking claws. I looked up at her and her eyes flashed red. I said, "Ma'am, please, just please, not today." She scanned my ID and then handed me my birth certificate. I walked the fuck out the door. No line, no wait. That's okay with me. What was not okay was when I walked out them doors and I looked up and I seen them demons going straight to the mayor's office. I was literally frozen in place. Like I didn't know what to do. Do I start chanting? Do I try to purify the area? Do I call a coven? The security guard that was inside is now outside standing behind me. He huffed behind my head. I turn and look up at this man. He said, "Mind your business, Star Child, and get back south." You ain't got to tell me. You ain't got to tell me. I came back home. I told my grandma what happened. She said, "What you say?" She grabbed the house phone, walked into her room, and made a few phone calls. I don't know what the phone calls were said, but yeah. It's something that runs Chicago, but it ain't a human mayor.
You can't make this stuff up. Might have known the story of real-life boogeyman.
In early 1983, residents of the Cranley Gardens apartment complex in North London began complaining about their drains being clogged up. Initially, their landlord was dismissive and said, "Oh, it's just an old building, it's old plumbing, and that's why it's slow." But eventually, the landlord conceded and asked a plumber to come out and have a look. And so, on the evening of February 8th, an experienced plumber named Mike came out to Cranley Gardens, and after learning what the complaints were, he went around to the side of the building and he opened up a drain cover to have a look inside. As expected, when he shined his light down, he saw wads of hair and napkins and other things kind of mashed together, clogging up the pipes. And so he reached in and he began pulling the stuff out and putting it in a bucket right next to him. And then after he had cleared the majority of the obstruction, he reached his arm all the way into this pipe to feel around to see if there was anything in there that he just couldn't see. And at some point, as he was reaching, when his arm was almost completely into this pipe, his hand hit a major blockage. And so he moved his fingers around to try to feel what it was, but he couldn't tell. It was something that was fairly soft, but there were some hard things inside of it, like sticks or rods. So he grabbed a handful of this blockage and he pulled his arm back out of the pipe. He opened his hand, and what he was holding looked like ground meat, but it wasn't any meat he had ever seen before. And inside of this fleshy substance looked like little bits of bone. Now, Mike had cleared many pipes before, and he had never seen meat be the reason for a blockage. And so this whole situation just seemed really strange, and he decided, it's late, I'll just come back tomorrow with my supervisor so he can see what this is too. So Mike puts the cap back on the drain pipe, and he walks out from behind the building back out towards his truck parked on the road. And as he's walking, two of the residents of this complex come out and they say, hey, did you fix the blockage? What was it? And Mike would say no, he hadn't. And then he just kind of blurted out that there was meat in the pipes. That was what was causing the blockage. And then one of these two residents says, well, I bet people are just flushing their Kentucky Fried Chicken down the drains. That's what's causing it. And Mike looked at him and he was like, yeah, maybe. And then he just turned around, got in his truck, and he drove away. Early the next morning, Mike and his supervisor came back to Cranley Gardens, and they went around to the side of the building. They undid that cap, and then Mike reached down inside expecting to feel this blockage, but where it should have been, there was nothing. Somebody had cleared the pipes. And so Mike and his supervisor are looking at each other, and Mike is like, there's no way that cleared on its own. Someone had to have come out here and cleared it, but I don't know why they would have done that and still had us come out. But the men decide, you know what, maybe by chance it did just kind of slip through and clear itself, so let's just continue the process and make sure each of the apartment buildings, their individual pipe is unobstructed. And when they checked these pipes, they found all of them were clear except for one, apartment number 23, whose pipe was blocked up with more of this meaty substance. Mike and his partner were already very suspicious of the fact that someone had snuck out here in the middle of the night and cleared the pipe. Probably. They didn't know if that happened, but it seemed likely. And now they're finding more of this weird meat substance coming from a particular apartment. And so the whole situation just seemed off. And so they told the landlord that they were not going to touch this. Somebody else had to come out and deal with this. And the landlord, after finding out there was meat jammed in the pipes, got really freaked out and called the police. The police showed up, they pulled this meat substance out of the pipes, and they sent it to a mortuary where a pathologist looked at it and said, this is meat. It's human meat. And in particular, the stuff that was pulled out of apartment number 23's pipes is that of a human neck. So the police go back to Cranley Gardens, they go up to apartment number 23, they knock on the door, and when the door opens, they're hit with this overwhelming stench of just rotting flesh. And standing in the doorway of this apartment, the owner of the apartment, is this guy who's in his late 30s, early 40s, who introduces himself as Dennis Nilsen. And they say, hey, Dennis, can we have a look around your apartment? And he says, why? And they say, well, we found human remains in your pipes. And Dennis immediately says, oh my goodness, I can't believe that. That's horrible. But the police are not buying it, and they say, you know what, Dennis, tell us where the rest of the body is. And at this, Dennis suddenly went expressionless, emotionless, and he just turns around and he points into his bedroom and he says, it's in 2 plastic bags in my closet. And so before the police go into his apartment to go inspect these bags, they say, Dennis, are there any other bodies in your apartment that we should know about? And Dennis sighs and he looks up to the ceiling and says, yeah, there's about 15 or 16 here. It's a long story. It goes way back. I'd love to tell it to you, get this off my chest, and I'll do it at the police station. So after Dennis was arrested and brought to the station, he told them his horrible story. It had all started 5 years earlier in 1978 when Dennis was 33. He was at a pub having some drinks by himself when a teenager came into the bar and attempted to buy an alcoholic drink, and he was denied service. And so Dennis pulled him aside and said, hey, I'd be happy to give you a drink at my apartment. It's right down the road. And the young man, whose name was Steven, was very excited about this and said, great, let's go. Once they arrived back and they were up in Dennis's apartment, the pair had lots of drinks and they were having fun and laughing. And then at some point, the pair climbed into bed together. The next morning, when Dennis got up, his new friend, Steven, was still sleeping right next to him. And he had this sudden, overwhelming sense of dread because he knew as soon as Steven woke up, he would see this as a one-night stand and he would just leave. He would not stick around and remain friends with Dennis. And Dennis just did not like that idea. He wanted Steven to stay. And so he looked on the ground next to the bed and he saw the necktie that Steven had been wearing was on the ground. And so he got on the ground, he grabbed the necktie, he fashioned it into a noose, and then he climbed back on the bed, got on top of Steven's chest, and he looped the tie around his neck, and then he pulled it as tight as he could. And as soon as it was tight, Dennis would tell police that Stephen came alive, and he began reaching for his neck and kicking Dennis as hard as he could, but he just can't get it off. And at some point, Dennis said Stephen just seemed to give up. He looked up at Dennis and knew he wasn't going to get this off and that Dennis was determined to kill him. And so Stephen just allowed himself to go limp, and then he slouched over. And as soon as that happened, Dennis said he relaxed. But as he's looking at Stephen, he realized he wasn't dead. He was just unconscious. And so Dennis goes into the kitchen and he gets this huge plastic bucket and he fills it up with water and he sets it in the middle of his kitchen floor. And then he gets a bunch of kitchen chairs and he lines them up like a table right in front of this bucket of water. And then he drags Stephen's body into the kitchen and he lays him on his back on these chairs, but makes sure his head is not resting on the chair. His head is kind of dangling off the back of these chairs. And then he grabbed that bucket of water and he slid it right underneath Stephen's head. And then Dennis got on top of the chairs, on top of Stephen, and then he pressed the young man's face straight down so his head went backwards until his mouth and his nose were under the water. And Dennis held him like that until Stephen regained consciousness, but again, he didn't fight it. He knew he was doomed. And after several minutes, the bubbles stopped coming to the surface and Stephen was dead. Dennis pulled his victim off of the chairs. He brought him into the living room and he sat him on a chair. And then Dennis went into the kitchen and he made himself a cup of coffee and he smoked some cigarettes. And then he just stood in the doorway and looked at Stephen's body. And he would tell police it was a very bizarre experience because Stephen still looked like he was alive. In fact, Dennis would try talking to him as if he was going to talk back, but obviously he didn't. And at some point, Dennis realized, the life he had before he killed Stephen was now over. He had a new life and he didn't really know how to handle it. And so the first thing he thought to do was to clean Stephen. So he took Stephen's body and he brought him into the bathroom and he gave him a very long bath, cleaned his body, cleaned his hair, and then afterwards he got him out, he dressed him and put him into his bed, and then Dennis climbed into bed with him and laid with him. And he would tell police as he laid there, he suddenly felt overjoyed. Stephen was not going to leave him. He was going to stay here as long as Dennis wanted him to. After laying with him for some time, Dennis realized he had to find a way to hide Stephen's body in his apartment so no one could find him. And so he left his apartment and he went to a hardware store where he got an electric knife and a big storage bin. And he brought them back to his apartment, and as he was about to cut Stephen up, he just couldn't go through with it. So instead, he just climbed into bed and took a nap next to Stephen's body. When he got up again, he moved Stephen's body onto the ground in his living room and covered him with a blanket. And then he went and made dinner and then sat in his chair in the living room right next to this body on the ground and watched TV for a while. When he was done watching TV and eating, he looked at the body on the floor and realized, he really hadn't made any progress in terms of hiding him somewhere in his apartment. And that's when he remembered he had a loose floorboard in his apartment. And so he went over to the loose floorboard, he pulled it up and he saw there was a space under the floors. And so he pulled a couple more boards up and then he grabbed Stephen's body and he attempted to force him down into this space. But by now, Stephen's body had begun to stiffen up from rigor mortis. Specifically, his arms were outstretched like a Y over his head. And so as Dennis is trying to force him down in there, his arms were not allowing him to go down into that small space. So Dennis took Stephen's body and he propped him up against the wall in his bedroom. So the body is against the wall, rigid, standing up with its arms up over its head, and Stephen's eyes were still open. And then after that, Dennis just got in bed and fell asleep. So all night, this corpse is staring at Dennis in his bed. And then the next morning when Dennis got up, there was Stephen still up against the wall with his hands in the air looking down at him. Dennis grabbed Stephen's body and put it on the ground, and he began yanking and jerking and pulling on each of Stephen's arms until they were pinned down by his side. And then after that, Dennis started working on his legs and his hips, and he began contorting him until he was small enough that he could pack him down under his floor. And then once he was under there, he just put the boards on top and went about his daily life. And for the next couple of days, he totally forgot about Stephen. But a week after putting him under the floor, Dennis decided he missed Stephen and he wanted to see him again. And so one night he opened up the floorboards, he looked down, and there was Stephen, and Dennis would say it looked like he was dirty. So he pulled him out of the floor and he gave him another bath. And then after he had cleaned Stephen, he pulled him out of the water, he dried him off, and he put him in the chair. And then Dennis took a bath himself in the same water he had just used to clean Stephen. After a long soak in this tub, Dennis finally got out, he toweled himself off, he redressed Stephen, and then he forced him back onto the floorboards and covered him up again. And he would remain there for the next 7 months until Dennis finally decided to dispose of him by burning him in a bonfire outside of their apartment building. building. And then after the body was completely incinerated and gone, Dennis remembered thinking, I can't believe I just got away with murder. And so he would do it again and again and again, killing at least 15 young men from North London, all by strangulation or by drowning or a combination of the two. And after he killed them, he would keep them stashed in his apartment for months at a time, in his closet, in his cabinets, in his bed, under the floors, all over his apartment. He had these bodies. And while these bodies were in his apartment, he liked to periodically take them out to spend time with them. He would tell police he found corpses to be beautiful. He was fascinated by them. But eventually, in 1983, he had so many bodies stashed all over his apartment that he knew he really needed to expedite getting rid of them. And so he began cutting them up and trying to force them down his drain, which eventually clogged the pipes. And so when Mike the plumber showed up and discovered this meaty substance in the pipes, and Dennis overheard him talking about it, that night after Mike was gone, Dennis had gone outside and attempted to clear the rest of the remains from the pipes. But he wasn't aware there were still remains stuck in the pipe that led to his specific apartment. Dennis Nilsen confessed to killing 15 young men and attempting to kill at least 7 others, and he was sentenced to life in prison. Dennis never showed any remorse, nor did he show any desire to want to be free again. He actually said he deserved to be in jail for what he did. In 2018, Dennis Nilsen would die in prison at the age of 72.
La Mano Peluda radio call is one of the scariest things that happen in Mexico, and guys, if you hear the real call, it's absolutely terrifying. This call supposedly cursed the host and a guy by the name Josue. This happened completely live, and a man by the name Josue called the station, like the radio station, begging for help because he made a pact with the devil in return for money and protection, but he had to sacrifice one of his loved ones, like a family member or something, to pay the price. During the call, his voice starts shaking. He claims that something is in the room with him, breathing literally next to him. The radio, the audio starts glitching. The audience can hear growls from the background. Yeah, it's bad. And he claims that something is touching him and that the demon wants to take him now, in that moment. During the call, Juan Ramon, which is the host, starts trying to pray with him through the phone, and guys, Josue is crying, he's just acting strange, and his voice completely changes into something deeper, and that's how we know that he is not alone anymore. Years later, the entire team met up with Josue, and then a few days later, the host mysteriously passes away, which is one of the creepiest things, and they say that the entity followed him back home. Till this day, the call is considered one of the most haunting recordings ever in Latin America. What do you guys think?
Weird spooky story time. This story is posted in the Reddit Glitch in the Matrix thread, but I don't know if this is a glitch in the Matrix. I think this is something else entirely. So the other night, my husband and I woke up at 3 a.m. and started to hear this really weird sound, like something was slowly falling in our room. So we shined a light in the general direction and we couldn't find or see what it was. Then slowly we started to see a weird neon light flashing on the wall. Then it would just disappear. After a few moments of this, our vision started pulsating, going in and out. I started freaking out, asking my husband if he noticed it too, which he did. After a few minutes of pulsating, everything started spinning over the corner on the wall where we had just pointed the flashlight and looked. It started making a vortex portal looking thing that would not stop. It really started to freak us out. The only time we couldn't see it was when we had some type of light source in the bedroom, so we had to sleep with the light on that night. We've never experienced anything like that before and haven't seen it again since. We have no idea what it could have been. I'm wondering if anyone has any clue. Please let us know what your beliefs are about what this could be, or if you've experienced anything like this before. I've heard stories like this where this vortex portal thing opens up, and I don't know what it is. Maybe it is a glitch in the Matrix. Maybe something's breaking and it's a view into the parallel universe. I don't know. Maybe it's something to a spiritual world. Let me know in the comments what you guys think, or if any of you have ever seen something like this.